JPMorgan Chase just made a move that should send shockwaves through New York's political class, and almost nobody is framing it the way it needs to be framed. After more than 150 years as a foundational pillar of Manhattan's financial ecosystem, the bank is expanding aggressively in Texas and Florida while consolidating parts of its New York footprint. And this isn't about office space. It's not even about one company. It's about whether the cost of doing business in America's largest city has crossed a line that math simply can't justify anymore. Imagine you're the CEO of a $500 billion institutional giant with 300,000 employees worldwide. Imagine you're staring at a spreadsheet where New York City's combined corporate tax burden sits at 13.7%. The top marginal state income tax rate hits 10.9%, and the city adds another 3.876% on top of that, nearly 15% before federal taxes. Let that sink in. Now imagine Texas, zero state income tax, or Florida, zero state income tax. Streamlined regulations, proactive governors calling you personally. What do? I'm Sophia Miller, and on this channel, we follow the money and expose the stories the mainstream won't touch. If you care about where the jobs are going and why your city feels different than it did 5 years ago, subscribe, smash the like button, and tell me in the comments, do you think New York can survive if its biggest financial players quietly shift south? Yes or no? Here's what's actually happening. This isn't about politics. It's about math. It's cause and effect. When you make it more expensive to operate, rational actors respond. JPMorgan isn't staging a dramatic exit. It's doing something far more telling. It's reallocating growth, expanding in Plano, Texas, growing in Tampa, Florida, building out Columbus, Ohio, consolidating divisions in New York, corporate speak for shrinking future headcount concentration without saying the word retreat. CEO Jamie Dimon has publicly acknowledged cost structure, regulation, and quality of life concerns as long-term strategic factors. That's not subtle. That's a warning shot. Because when a bank of this scale moves even 5% of incremental growth out of a city, that's not a small number. That's thousands of high-income jobs over time, thousands of families, thousands of paychecks that won't be taxed at nearly 15% locally. And here's the bigger story nobody wants to say out loud. When the most systemically important bank in the country signals that the New York premium may no longer be justified, competitors notice, investors notice, boards notice. So how did we get here? Let's go back to where this really started. 3 to 5 years ago, the first domino didn't look dramatic. It rarely does. New York's progressive leadership approved incremental increases to the corporate tax structure, nudging the combined state and local burden to 13.7%. Translation: every additional dollar JPMorgan earned inside city limits faced one of the highest local tax environments in America before federal taxes even entered the equation. That same year, the top marginal state income tax rate climbed to 10.9%, and New York City layered on another 3.876% income tax, nearly 15% combined before Washington takes its cut. Let that sink in. In plain language, if you are a senior managing director earning $800,000, you are writing 6 figures in checks to Albany and City Hall before you even think about federal obligations. The second domino fell quietly during the remote work explosion. Manhattan office occupancy, according to city controller reports, hovered around 47% of pre-2020 levels at one point. That's not just a number. That's empty towers, empty restaurants, empty sidewalks. Meanwhile, Texas reported corporate relocations increasing by over 114% year over year during peak migration periods, according to state economic development offices. Florida posted similar gains, with Tampa adding thousands of financial services roles. Comparison matters. New York saw $19 billion in adjusted gross income leave through outmigration in a single measured period. $19 billion. That's not a rounding error. That's a shrinking tax base. The third domino came in the form of regulatory layering. Progressive city council members championed additional compliance mandates and labor restrictions. Public rhetoric intensified. One prominent New York lawmaker, State Senator Brad Hoylman-Seigel, criticized large financial institutions for what he called extractive capitalism that owes more to the city that made it rich. That quote circulated. Executives read it. Boards read it. Translation: you are a political target. Now shift your lens south. In Texas, Governor Greg Abbott's office ran direct outreach campaigns to financial firms, highlighting zero state income tax and faster permitting timelines. In Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis personally met with financial executives and framed the state as a long-term partner, not an adversary. That's not symbolism, that's strategic recruitment. While New York's effective top income tax rate approached 14.776% before federal obligations, Texas and Florida sat at zero on the state level. That gap compounds annually. On a $1 million compensation package, the difference can exceed $140,000 per executive per year. Multiply that by 500 senior roles. That's $70 million in annual differential. That's not a small number. That's a board-level discussion. The fourth domino was precedent. Citadel relocated its headquarters to Miami. BlackRock, managing over $10 trillion in assets, began diversifying geographic risk. When firms controlling trillions adjust posture, the signal echoes. JPMorgan employs roughly 300,000 people globally. Even if only 10% of incremental hiring shifts away from Manhattan over 5 years, that could represent thousands of positions. According to Bureau of Labor Statistics data, every high-paying finance job in a major metro supports approximately 3.5 additional local jobs. Let that sink in. Domino 5 was quality of life. Jamie Dimon publicly cited crime concerns, regulatory complexity, and cost structure as long-term strategic variables. I'm not making a partisan point. I'm stating an observable fact. When leadership repeatedly flags cost and regulation, that's not random commentary. It's signaling. The sixth domino was consolidation language. Internal memos referenced reviewing geographic footprint and optimizing operational distribution. Corporate speak for we're looking for the exit on future growth allocation, not a headline-grabbing departure. A gradual rebalancing. And here's the beautiful irony nobody wants to talk about. The same progressive officials expressing outrage at corporate disloyalty are the architects of the cost structure triggering the shift. The people who caused this are now blaming corporations and forming committees. Who benefits? Not the working families these politicians claim to represent. By the time JPMorgan publicly emphasizes Plano expansion and Tampa growth, the decision isn't spontaneous. It's the final link in a chain reaction. The dominoes fell one by one: higher taxes, layered regulation, public hostility, remote work flexibility, competitive recruitment from zero-tax states, precedent relocations, executive signaling, board-level math. It's cause and effect. And when a 150-year institutional anchor begins consolidating in the city it once defined, that's not optics. That's a structural shift already underway. Carlos has worked in Lower Manhattan for 16 years. He started as an operations analyst straight out of college and climbed his way into a mid-level compliance role earning $92,000 a year. Not Wall Street elite money, not private jet money, solid working professional income that supports a mortgage in Queens, 2 kids in public school, and a mother whose prescriptions aren't getting any cheaper. His commute runs 90 minutes door to door. He accepted that trade-off because New York meant stability. It meant opportunity. It meant the epicenter of global finance. Now he's sitting in a conference room hearing about strategic consolidation and geographic optimization. Corporate speak for certain roles moving to Plano and Tampa. He has a choice: relocate to Texas, uproot his children, sell the house, leave his mother's doctors, or stay and risk being phased out over time. That's not theoretical. That's his life. According to internal workforce summaries and industry reporting, JPMorgan employs roughly 300,000 people globally, with tens of thousands concentrated in the New York metro area. Even a 5% shift in headcount over several years could mean thousands of positions redistributed elsewhere. That's not a small number. That's entire neighborhoods feeling the tremor. The Bureau of Labor Statistics estimates that every finance job in a major metro supports around 3.5 additional local jobs. Let that sink in. If 2,000 high-paying roles gradually move or disappear from Manhattan's growth pipeline, that could influence 7,000 additional positions in restaurants, cleaning services, maintenance, security, and retail. That's not abstract. That's the coffee cart vendor on Water Street who sells Carlos his morning cafecito. That's the family-owned deli that depends on the lunch rush. That's the landlord who built his pro forma around consistent occupancy from finance professionals. That's the public school teacher whose funding depends on a stable property tax base. That's the contractor renovating apartments for six-figure tenants. It ripples outward. Manhattan office vacancy has hovered near or above 20% in certain districts since the remote work shift, according to commercial real estate trackers. That's not just empty space, that's declining commercial property values. Commercial property taxes represent a significant portion of New York City revenue. When valuations drop, so does the tax base. In one measured period, New York saw approximately $19 billion in adjusted gross income leave due to outmigration. $19 billion. That's not just a statistic. That's fewer high earners funding transit, sanitation, and public safety. Meanwhile, Texas and Florida actively advertise zero state income tax and streamlined regulatory frameworks. A managing director relocating from Manhattan to Plano could save well over $100,000 annually in state and local taxes alone, depending on compensation structure. Multiply that across hundreds of roles. The compounding effect becomes enormous. For Carlos, though, the macro doesn't matter. His kids ask if they'll have to move. His wife asks what schools look like in Texas. His mother asks if her insurance will even work there. The policies sold as protecting working families created an environment where his job security now depends on geography. The city's response: press conferences, task forces, study committees examining corporate responsibility. Some members of the Progressive City Council have floated new targeted levies on high-income earners to stabilize revenue. Translation: raise costs on the remaining base. Its cause and effect: higher taxes encourage outmigration. Outmigration shrinks the base. Shrinking base triggers proposals for even higher taxes. That is a doom loop, a death spiral. And here's the brutal part. The people who caused this are now blaming corporations and demanding federal support to fill budget gaps. Who benefits? Not the working families these politicians claim to represent. Carlos doesn't care about ideological debates. He cares about whether uprooting his life is the only way to preserve the career he built over 16 years. He cares about whether the city he believed in can still compete. When institutional giants like JPMorgan signal that future growth belongs elsewhere, it's not an overnight collapse. It's erosion, slow, persistent, compounding. And the longer the political class refuses to connect policy to consequence, the faster that erosion accelerates. The spreadsheet moves first, then the jobs, then the families, then the tax base. And once that sequence gains momentum, reversing it becomes exponentially harder. So why do politicians keep doing this when the damage is predictable? Because their incentives are political, not economic. Short election cycles reward rhetoric, not long-term fiscal math. A progressive city council member can rail against corporate greed and win applause in the moment. They don't personally absorb the capital flight 3 years later. By the time commercial property tax receipts decline or high earners quietly change residency, the official has moved on to a new office or shifted the blame. I'm not making a partisan point. I'm stating an observable fact. When New York's combined corporate tax burden sits at 13.7%, when the top marginal state income tax hits 10.9%, when the city layers on another 3.876%, approaching nearly 15% before federal taxes, the response from rational actors is not emotional. It's mathematical. This isn't about politics. It's about math. It's cause and effect. Meanwhile, look at Florida and Texas. Governor Ron DeSantis didn't scold financial firms. He publicly welcomed them. He highlighted zero state income tax and regulatory predictability. Governor Greg Abbott's administration actively markets Texas and high-tax states, running recruitment campaigns and offering streamlined permitting. That's strategy. That's alignment. When Citadel relocated its headquarters to Miami, it wasn't treated as betrayal. It was treated as a victory. When companies evaluate moving roles to Plano or Tampa, they aren't guessing about the welcome mat. It's already laid out. And here's the beautiful irony nobody wants to talk about. The same leaders in high-tax states who denounce corporate departures often turn around and quietly request federal assistance when revenue projections miss targets. The people who caused this are now blaming corporations and forming committees or demanding bailouts. Who benefits? Not the working families these politicians claim to represent. Population loss carries consequences beyond empty office towers. According to the most recent census adjustments, states like Texas and Florida gained congressional seats, while states like New York and Illinois lost representation. That's not symbolic. That's power. Fewer seats mean less influence over federal spending and regulatory frameworks. When $19 billion in adjusted gross income leaves a state in one measured period, that's not just accountants changing addresses. That's leverage shifting. And once capital and talent ecosystems reach a tipping point, recovery becomes exponentially harder. Financial services operate on network effects. Talent attracts talent. Capital attracts capital. When JPMorgan, with roughly 300,000 global employees and a balance sheet influencing trillions in activity, signals that future growth belongs outside Manhattan, competitors watch closely. Boards ask quiet questions. Investors adjust risk models. You might not live in New York. You might not work in finance. But this isn't just about Manhattan. It's a preview. When any city treats its largest employers as political punching bags while steadily increasing costs, the outcome follows a pattern. Illinois, California. Now New York showing cracks. A death spiral doesn't start with collapse. It starts with denial. It starts with leaders insisting everything is fine while vacancy rates climb and tax bases shrink. It starts with headlines expressing outrage at corporate disloyalty while ignoring the structural incentives pushing companies out. And once the doom loop tightens, reversing it requires admitting the original premise was flawed. How many politicians willingly do that? So here's the real question for you. Should cities prioritize ideological purity, even if it risks shrinking opportunity, or should they recalibrate when the math stops working? That's not a softball question. That's a crossroads, because the trajectory isn't hidden. It's visible in tax filings, census data, relocation announcements, and executive interviews. The story is being written in real time, and you are living through it whether you recognize it or not. If you want more investigations that follow the money and connect policy to consequence, subscribe right now. Like this video so the algorithm pushes it to people who need to see it. Share it with anyone who still believes these moves happen in a vacuum, because they don't. This story is being written in real time, and the ending hasn't been decided yet. But if we don't start holding these people accountable, we already know how it ends.